to go. So, hi everybody. Happy Wednesday. Happy Earth Day Eve. Clark and Dylan are here from the Green Team with a very special announcement for you. Clark and Dylan?
Everyone. So we just wanted to come on here real quick this school meeting to tell you guys about our Green Team documentary watch parties that are scheduled tomorrow for Earth Day. We really wanted to do something special this year to celebrate Earth Day. It's pretty important to us. And so we chose 3 documentaries that we will be showing tomorrow night starting at 8 p.m. The first one is Before the Flood, which will be projected on the football press box. So just come to the football field. Before the Flood is about Leonardo DiCaprio going around the planet to understand climate change and its impacts on the world. The second documentary is The Game Changers, and that would be projected in the Student Center Fishbowl. The Game Changers is about a study that James Wilkes did by flying around the world to see how going vegan is actually possible, and many athletes do it around the world. And it shows that anyone can go vegan and you can get your protein not just from eating meat. And then the third documentary is The Sacrifice Zone, and it'll be played on Tippett's Beach. The Sacrifice Zone addresses the environmental injustice in Newark, New Jersey, whose neighborhoods and big-time polluting industries are separated by no more than railroad tracks.
Yeah, and we have asked teachers to give a slightly lower homework load night to accommodate students taking time out of the evening to come to Green Team's documentary watch parties. You should see little posters up all around campus that say where each movie will be located. We'll also follow up this meeting with an email that has everything you need to know. And then in addition, this Sunday, we're hosting a planting event on back campus, which should be a lot of fun. And we'll meet at the Student Center patio and we'll leave at 3 p.m. Again, tomorrow evening, 8 p.m., Fishbowl, Tippett's Beach, or the football field. No signups required. We hope to see you all there. And go Green Team. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. That was fantastic. And I hope you have wonderful support. And that planning event sounds especially cool. I'm really excited about that. Okay, so we're going to get started for the main feature of today's poetry-themed school meeting. This meeting is going to be a little different from other poetry meetings we've had in the past because you're going to be hearing from current students and a recent alum about their experiences with poetry. So we're really excited about what's to come over the next 40 or so minutes. We've been planning it for a really long time. We know it's going to be great. So many of you already know about the Poetry Out Loud program. Poetry Out Loud is a national student poetry recitation contest, and that starts on a regional level and then moves up through state competitions and finally onto a national competition where student representatives from 50 states compete in Washington, D.C. And Mercersburg has had a Poetry Out Loud representative for as long as I can remember, and we've always done very well in the contest. So this year, Chelsea Seaby Bruno, the class of 2021, proudly represented Mercersburg, and she did that through a video submission, which was really unique and different, but of course it was in response to the changes for COVID. Chelsea worked with Ms. Muffson and with me this past fall and this past winter, and even over breaks. And anybody who knows Chelsea knows that she's an incredible person and an incredible talent and also an absolute joy to work with. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Chelsea in Saudi Arabia right now. Thank you, Chelsea, for your incredibly fine work. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Muffson for the amazing performance work she has done with all of our Poetry Out Loud students over many, many years. When Ms. Muffson retires next year or at the end of this year, I'm going to be completely lost without her. So thank you, Ms. Muffson, for the wonderful collaborations we've had over the years. Chelsea prepared 3 poems for the regional competition, but today we want to share with you just one of her poems. It's called More Lies by Karen Gottschall, and I hope you enjoy it.
More Lies by Karen Gottschall. Sometimes I say, I'm going to meet my sister at the cafe, even though I have no sister, just because it's such a beautiful thing to say. I've always thought so, ever since I read a novel in which 2 sisters were constantly meeting in cafes. Today, for example, I walked alone on the wet sidewalk, wearing my rain boots, expecting someone might ask me where I was headed. I bought a steno pad and a watch battery. The store windows fogged up. Rain in April is a kind of promise, and it costs nothing. I carried a bag of books to the cafe and ordered tea. I like a place that's lit by lamps. I like a place where I can hear people talk about small things like the difference between azure and cerulean and the price of tulips. It's going down. I watched someone who could be my sister walk in, shaking the rain from her hair. I thought, even now, florists are filling their coolers with tulips, $5 a bundle. All over the city, there are sisters. Any one of them could be mine.
Yay, snaps for Chelsea. Fantastic job, Chelsea. I hope if you know Chelsea, you'll reach out to her and congratulate her for her incredible recitation. So now I'd like to turn the program over to our main event, a conversation between another incredible member of this senior class, Lian Wang, who will be speaking with Grace Piotrowski, a Mercersburg alum from the class of 2015. So Lian and Grace, over to you, and welcome back to Mercersburg, Grace.
Thank you, Ms. Poacelli, and thank you, Grace, for being here virtually. Before we begin our conversation, I want to quickly introduce Grace to the school community. Grace is a feminist, environmentalist, and breakfast food enthusiast. She also writes and performs poetry exploring the intersection of gender, coming of age, and politics through a comedic lens. Her work has been featured in 2 Meter Review, Lazy Woman, and The Right Launch, among others, with feature performances at the Green Mill, Turtle at the Duke, and Alliance Francaise de Chicago. Originally from Buffalo, New York, Grace graduated from Mercersburg in 2015 before attending Northwestern University, and she now resides in Chicago, Illinois.
Thank you, Lian. And now I, for those of you who don't know Lian already, get to introduce her. Lian is a senior at Mercersburg, originally from Hong Kong. She's the literary editor-in-chief of Blue Review, as well as dance captain, news editor, and head Blue Key. She enjoys writing poetry and personal essays about everything from culture to time and space to random observations in everyday life. And I'm so excited to be able to chat with you today. So I'm going to kick it off by reading a couple of my own poems, and then we'll talk. Thank you again for having me today. The first poem I'm going to be reading is inspired by the first photo of a black hole that was taken about 2 years ago in April of 2019. And this poem is called Little Miss Black Hole. She hid all these years aloof, afraid of the camera, knowing it would add 10 pounds to an already unmeasurable amount of mass. No wonder she kept hidden in support groups with Bigfoot and the Loch Ness, lamenting the exoticization of their image, the fascination with their existence, preferring to linger in stories and theories, afraid she wouldn't live up to the awe of how she took up space, to the wonder of how she did the opposite of light up a room and the beauty in that ability. And she was right. They said it was no big deal. They said it wasn't that beautiful, but I say it was stunning. She was stunning, and so were the women behind the camera, the women behind the mask, behind the camera. I mean, look at how far we've come. To see new parts of the universe and dare to call them unmoving, as if beauty is in appearance and not discovery itself. The next poem did not happen to me in Mercersburg, was inspired by something in college, but I felt was relatable to our time living on campus together, and the experiences of living with lots of people in a dorm. And this one is called On Pooping While the Cool Girl is in the Bathroom. We both got up and walked out of the room at the same time, and I thought, crap, because I had to shit, and of course she had to sit in the stall next to me, and I couldn't do it with her there. Not because there was someone there, but because she was there, the coolest girl in the room. And we all know that cool girls don't poop. And we all know that that fact is the one and only thing keeping me from being a cool girl. So I held it in as we both sat in silence, hyper aware of the other one's presence, waiting for our bodies to make some kind of sound while praying that our bodies don't make any kind of sound. Part of me thought maybe she's about to poop too, but then she didn't. Then she peed and flushed and walked out, but not fast enough for my own ass to erupt. And I did not make eye contact as I walked back in the room, knowing she now knew my secret. I would never be a cool girl. It's sometimes hard to do these virtual readings, but I hope people laughed at that one. The next poem, a little more heartfelt, was written before she passed away, but was inspired by Justice Ginsburg, and it's called A Love Letter to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. My dearest RBG, your daily push-ups inspire me to work out more, to push more, to look up more, and your dissents are, well, notorious. They remind me that no one can stop my glass ceiling smashing. I know you didn't expect to carry the weight of the country on your shoulders. I wish I could give you my shoulders. I wish you could give me the weight, give us the weight. Let every fan and follower take an ounce, carry it in our pockets at every peaceful protest, down every canvas street, tuck it into our shoes when we feel like we can't possibly hold on to all the pieces we're trying to grasp. Honestly, I would give you any body part. We will build you a robot of crowdsourced fingers and feet, toes and teeth, prove to the right that they're right to fear you're not going anywhere. I wish you were going somewhere. I wish you were going to Paris or Rome, traveling to Mexico, not to save the children, but to enjoy the beaches, to spend a day on a park bench in New York rather than the bench in DC. I wish you could stay in your robe all day, your bathrobe, that is. Sit at the kitchen table and refuse to read the newspaper, catch up with your friends, rewatch every episode of Friends, never worry about picking out the right collar again. Two more for you. The next one is a short personal take during quarantine from what people now refer to as the infamous Plum poem by William Carlos Williams, and mine is called Apologies to My Roommate During Quarantine. I have killed the plant that you left by the window and kindly asked me to water until your return. Forgive me, I wanted to help, but I'm not good at chores. And my final piece before Lian and I get to chat is called Reflections on Others. I like people who drink craft beer and cheap wine. I like when people aren't bothered by walking in the rain and when people have no guilty pleasures, just things they enjoy. I like people who flirt and people who don't care about staying with a friend of a cousin's old roommate and always have their couch open to pass on the favor. I like people who believe in fate and people whose love language is making playlists. I like people who look up directions so you don't have to, and people who rock climb and people who stay for dessert and people who have backpacked but can talk about something other than their backpacking trips. I like when people crouch to talk to kids at their eye level. I like people who send postcards and people who tip well and people who always carry their water bottle and chapstick with them. I like people who have green thumbs and good relationships with their siblings. I like people who whistle but can't keep beat. I like people who like bad movies. I like people who never take out the trash but always remind themselves not to forget, and people who take too many selfies and have a favorite season and people who always text back, even if it's never on time. Thank you. Lian.
Thank you so much, Grace, for reading those poems. I know I really enjoyed them. So we'll just move on to questions. I prepared a couple questions and we're just going to chat about them. So first, you graduated from Mercersburg in 2015. What were you involved in here and what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I came as a freshman in 2011 and graduated in 2015. During my time on campus, I was involved in Blue Review and student council and dance. As Lian and I were first chatting and getting to know each other, we found out we were involved in a lot of the same things. So, yeah.
And so as an English student, both at Mercersburg and a creative writing minor at Northwestern, you've obviously taken your fair share of English classes. Could you tell us a bit about some of your favorite classes?
So my favorite Mercersburg English class that I took was with Matt Coretti, and it was a term class during my senior year called Zen in the Beat Generation. And the class was about Buddhism and spirituality and the Beat authors, which ended up becoming my favorite literary genre. I also really loved Mr. Bennett's 9th and 11th grade English classes. I came to Mercersburg and I just had some catching up to do from my middle school English classes, and he really helped me get up to kind of the par and the caliber that we are expected to have at Mercersburg. Like you mentioned, in Northwestern, I studied creative writing, and two of my favorite classes, one was a poetry workshop with Natasha Trethaway, who is a former poet laureate, and it was just, I felt very starstruck to be getting feedback from her and writing advice from her. And then a contemporary poetry seminar that brought in a lot of new voices that we don't always read or write or listen to in kind of the standard poetry canon. So that was super cool.
It's always really interesting to talk to alumni and hear that like we've had some of the same teachers and same classes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of times when we're taught poetry, we think of poetry written on the page. But how did you get involved in performance poetry?
It actually started at Mercersburg with the quarterly spoken word nights. I think you guys just had one on campus. And during those, I was always very nervous, but I would still go. I'd write my poem, or if I had a couple poems, I'd write them kind of the days or the weeks before. And then I would go over to Leah Cook's room, everyone's favorite alumni officer, and she would help me like get ready and decide what to read. She actually still does that for me and was consulted on what I would read today for everybody. So just so you know, the people hyping you up there will be hyping you up 10 years from now. But that was my experience doing it in high school. And then when I went on to college and I was studying creative writing, again, it was mostly reading and writing. I didn't get into performing until I was studying abroad in Ireland. I got into this group of Irish poets and we go out and perform every week. And then when I came back to Chicago, I knew I needed to find my community like that here. I started going to a slam that was run every week by Mark Smith, who invented slam poetry like 35 years ago. And I would just show up at the bar every week and perform and read. And then from there, I've kind of met what my friends now call my poet society, which is just like a group of us that get together and we read every week. And then during quarantine, we've been like holding each other accountable to write.
Yeah, no, that sounds really fun.
It's all about just finding your people or just showing up every week. And then people are like, oh, you look familiar, and you become friends.
Yeah, for sure. It's also really cool to hear that you got your start at spoken word. I know it was last weekend And it was a really cool event because it was like outside with lights and a fun campfire and everything. But
Oh, that must be so fun.
yeah. I always like find it really fascinating to hear about how different writers like approach the writing process. So what does this process of writing and then performing look like for you?
So the writing and the performing process are definitely very different, and my approach is very different. Honestly, my writing like process um, is no process. I do tend to be one of those people who kind of, I don't have as much structure as maybe I should with my writing, but it's like whenever I'm kind of feeling inspired or have time, um, then I write. Especially out of college, you don't have that deadline to hit, you don't have any due dates. So it's a little bit different. I will say when COVID hit right in the middle of March last year, as we were coming up to National Poetry Month, the poet group, we did daily prompts to get people to write every day, and having other people around to kind of hold you accountable to writing was really helpful. But my structure, my process is pretty unstructured. For performing, however, it's completely different because performing is where I feel the least confident. So when I know that I have an event coming up, especially if I'm the main person, I do a ton of practice ahead of time, pretending to perform, doing recitation, things like that. And something I've learned that really works for me is I do get really nervous ahead of time, but the more that you go up and do it, when I was performing every week, it just becomes more natural and not like oh, this is a big thing coming up that I have to worry about. It's just every week I go up and do it and like get over my nerves, and it ends up feeling, you like get more confident over time.
Yeah, no, I know. Having sort of that group of people to hold you accountable to write every day is definitely really helpful. I know that sometimes even if I feel really uninspired, I kind of just try to force myself to write, and always something comes out, even if it is bad. And I know a lot of writers follow that same idea as well. But
I mean, people talk about it as like writing as a muscle, and you have to do it every day and exercise it. And that's totally accurate.
okay, so the poems you performed earlier were pretty much on everything from pooping to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Are there certain themes or topics that you find yourself gravitating towards whenever you write or perform?
Yeah, so a lot of my writing does focus a lot on feminism, on saving the earth, because those are issues that I care about. But I also try to get inspiration from my own life experiences. So there are issues I care about, but there are also things that I go through or that everybody goes through, whether it's with coming of age or relationships or love or family, things like that. Um, I think something I try to aim for is being able to tell my own story, but make it relatable to other people. So not everybody has gone through what I've gone through, but they've all experienced similar emotions. That's actually what the workshop next week will be on, which we can talk about later, but trying to find ways to express yourself in a way that others can relate to. Personally, I do try to add a bit of humor to poetry, which I have found is a pleasant surprise for people, because a lot of times people will go into a poetry reading kind of mentally prepared to hear what they expect poetry to be, which is often sad or melancholy. It's about love and nature and relationships, and it is all that, but it can be more. So when I have a poem about body functions and the embarrassing moments that we have in our life, I think it's an added surprise for people, and kind of shows that poetry can be more than what kind of the people think it is.
Yeah, and in the poems you read earlier, they're definitely covering more serious or heavy topics, but in a really light way. And I think that definitely works for you.
Thanks.
So when you set off to write, do you usually have like a topic in mind, or is it something that like comes to you while you're writing, or is that you only find through the process of writing?
So I think, and this kind of connects back to my process, that by the time I'm writing something down, I've kind of been chewing it in my head for a while, where I think of something, or I have scraps of ideas littering my notes app on my phone, where I think of something, write it down, and think I'll
I
get back
get
to
that.
it. I'm sure you can relate. But yeah, I think it is more like in the moment, something will hit me, and then I'll kind of linger on it for a while and think through, like, how do I want to talk about it? What perspective am I taking? What are the details that I want to call out or acknowledge? And then by the time I write it down, I have more of it fleshed out in my head.
Yeah, okay. And it's kind of straying a bit away from poetry, or not really, but how do you integrate like writing and performing poetry with some of your other interests? And like, what are some of your plans, both poetry and non-poetry related, for the near and far future, I guess?
So poetry is not my day job. Unsurprisingly, it does not make much money, which is fine. I really love it as just a hobby and kind of an outlet from my normal life. I do have a job. I was working on the Biden campaign last year, and this year I'm helping running operations right now for a vaccination outreach program. So poetry has always been kind of a side fun thing that is a break from my day-to-day work. I don't know how I see it going or like turning out in the long run. Next weekend, I'm performing in an environmental festival, doing like a poetry slam. So there are always those like this things that I look forward to that I can kind of integrate it into my life. I feel like I've been really lucky I studied poetry at a very elite university, and then so you have this formal academic background training, but I've also learned so much from, you know, the bars where people perform, or the basements that people perform, like that kind of more down to earth poetry scene. And I think I'm really lucky to be able to cross both of those communities. They are both really valuable in the holistic like environment of poetry, but not everybody gets to participate in both. So in the future, I don't know if that means I do pursue it more academically, or if I just continue it as a fun thing that I like to do. I think it definitely, my work affects my poetry, as I'm involved in politics in my real life, and I tend to write about that as well. So having other ways to get inspiration, I wouldn't have written poems like that if I wasn't living it outside of my writing life.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think is sort of the value in writing and performing poetry, or other types of writing, both for yourself and also for the greater community and society?
There's so much value in poetry and writing and art in general. Poetry is definitely my main form of writing, but I do others when I'm feeling inspired to do it. Recently, especially with the pandemic, I think we are often we're often given like, oh, you can turn your side hustle into a full-time job, or you can monetize it. And if someone offered me a book deal tomorrow, I'm not going to say no to that, but I do recognize and have been trying to reinstill the value of creating for yourself, with the idea of not having to monetize everything if you have that privilege of being able to, and the value of just creating, writing, or art in general. You and I are both dancers. Like, there's more that people have their passion in, to just kind of take a break from your normal life, to be able to process, to be able to connect with people. Or even at the end of the day, one of the most valuable things that I've taken away from my writing is the other people that I've met through it, whether it's like an actually famous poet or artist, or just people around me who enjoy art and appreciate it. And I have people to go out with, and to go to a show with, or go to a reading with. So
Just one last question before we move on to Q&As. Just working with Blue Review, because I look at all of the submissions coming in, and there's a ton of like talent in the Mercersburg community and a lot of really fledgling writers. So for someone who's just getting into writing poetry or any other form of writing, what advice would you give to them?
Advice. I feel like it makes me sound more official than I am to be able to bequeath advice. But I think what I hear a lot, and I'll retell, is reading a ton and exposing yourself to other poets, both that you wouldn't have found on your own, but also things that are beyond your current class curriculum. I think Mercersburg was really good about integrating lots of different voices into what we were studying and learning about, but there's always more. And you should be questioning like who you're reading and then who you're not reading. So if you're reading a lot of white male poets, look for female voices, look for queer voices, look for immigrant voices, for BIPOC voices in what you're reading. This relates to poetry, but everything, I guess, but especially with poetry. And then when you're writing, the best advice anybody ever told me was that if you're like me and you really go off of when you're inspired and you're not good at writing every day, if you have that moment of inspiration, take a moment to pause and figure out what is your environment, what time of day is it, what were you doing, what are you doing later, and then try to recreate that more often. So I tend to be inspired in the evenings. I'm not going to try and set up a habit to write every morning if that is not my time of day.
That's a very good piece of advice.
I know, that's my favorite. It's not mine. I got it from somebody else, but I hope it helps.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move on to the Q&A section, so you can start entering questions for Grace using the Q&A feature now. Ask your teachers to enter questions, stuff like that. I just wanted to quickly note that Grace is offering a virtual poetry workshop on April 27th from 7 to 8 p.m. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, Grace?
Yeah, the workshop is called Telling Your Own Story Through Poetry. In the workshop, we're going to reflect on the small memories that stick with us and how it's often the most unique experiences that can create connections through shared emotion. You don't have to have any writing background, or you could have never read a poem in your life and you should come hang out and write some poems. You can sign up through a Google form that Mrs. Poacelli will make available through Gmail following the meeting.
Great. Hope to see y'all there. Anyways, so we have our first questions come in. This is from anonymous attendee. What has been your support system throughout your life?
Oh, that's a good one. My family is definitely my biggest. They helped me get to Mercersburg in the first place. But I will be very honest with you, a lot of my Mercersburg friends are still some of my biggest supporters and my biggest support system. After you graduate and you move across the country and across the world, it takes so much effort to get together. And I'm lucky to have friends that work really hard and we try to get together once or twice a year. And I think the important thing when you're thinking of your support system is finding people who are there with you and then putting in efforts to those relationships and working on them. Because especially when you graduate, it's a lot harder to keep in touch with people from high school or from college when you don't live a block away from them. But all my friends and family have been so supportive.
Great. This is from Mrs. Howes. Do you keep all of your work together in a collection, and how often do you revisit your earliest work?
My work is mostly now in Google Docs, especially when I do kind of have a collection of things that I go through when I'm figuring out what I want to perform for new audiences. Revisiting my earliest work, I mean, technically yes, but I don't think anybody wants to see what I was writing at 12 or 13. I'm sure I would cringe. It's somewhere in my bedroom, my childhood bedroom. More recently, there are pieces that I go back to maybe a couple years later, and I think, oh, I can revisit it or do something differently. But I try to just work on new stuff and continue improving that way.
Another one from anonymous attendee. What's your day job? And could you maybe tell us a bit more about your work?
Yes. My current day job is I'm doing managing operations for a New York City vaccination outreach program. A lot of my work just day to day. Before that, I was working in on the Biden team and then in a nonprofit. A lot of my work is relating to operations. So very different than being creative and writing poetry. I manage a lot of Excel sheets and managing, interviewing, hiring people, onboarding people, keeping track of basically what we're doing right now is trying to get as many people vaccinated in New York and a lot of low income neighborhoods as we can. And it's a lot of educating people on the pros of getting vaccinated. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then hopefully we get people vaccinated soon and we'll see what's next for me after that.
Yeah, I know most Mercersburg students got vaccinated today, or at least their first shot. So,
oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah. From Mrs. Moore, Grace, thanks for giving back to Mercersburg Academy. Can you let the high schoolers know other places besides bars that they might find to perform at?
Oh my God, yes, sorry. I think that there do tend to be places that like if you go in the afternoon, they're at a bar because that's where people can gather. There are places that I couldn't go to right away in college, but what I would do if you're looking for places to perform is, especially if you're in kind of bigger cities. I'm originally from Buffalo and they don't have a ton of options, but in Chicago, there's so many poetry communities. Google is your friend. I would look up, poetry open mics near me. And then be sure to call ahead of time. A lot of times there will be libraries or colleges that will have open mic readings. Also, sometimes there will be nonprofits that are specifically for poetry or even writing or the arts, and they do different events. So for example, the Poetry Foundation will have open mic readings. Young Chicago Authors will have open mic readings. Those are two places, two nonprofits in Chicago. So if you're looking for other places, that's what I would look up, is like writing nonprofits as well as just poetry open mic.
Okay. And this is from Miss Brewer. Who's your favorite spoken word poet?
My favorite spoken word poet is Olivia Gatwood. She has 2 books of poetry out, and she talks about a lot of similar issues that I talk about. And I think I get a lot of inspiration from her writing.
We have a lot of questions. This is from Miss Dalton. Grace, you were such an incredible choreographer when you were here. You still communicate through movement.
I still talk with my hands a lot. I'm sure you noticed that. I don't dance as much anymore. I think my dance background has really helped me in my performing of like how I connect with the audience. So there are people who will go up and read, and you can tell they're just like reading from the page. And then I think the goal of when you're reading out loud is to really project, to think about how you're standing, if you're going to move your arms during that piece. So no, I'm not dancing anymore, but I definitely do think that kind of your body language when you're on stage is has still affected me.
And this is from Miss Bradley. Grace, so lovely to see and hear you. Definitely laughed out loud in your bathroom/poop poem. Curious, what's an example of a supportive critique Leah Cook has offered?
Oh, Leah is such a hype woman. Um, in terms of critiques, I think it's more that I'll come to her often with like, what do you think is better, this or that? And she'll help me decide. Like that poop poem, I was like, I don't know, is it funny? Will people like be cringing in the classroom? And she said, no, I think it'll go over okay. She has seen me perform in Chicago and has read some of my other work. And I think she's really good at elevating things that I might be unsure about, that she's like, oh no, it's great.
And we have a couple seconds left. So last quick question, pretzel pie or chocolate chip cookie pie?
Chocolate chip cookie.
Me too.
I love it. I mean, now cooking for yourself, you're like, okay, yeah, I wish someone made me a pretzel pie or a chocolate chip cookie pie.
I get that at home for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we are out of time right now, but everyone remember, if you're interested, sign up for Grace's virtual poetry workshop. That's going to be April 27th from 7 to 8 p.m. And Ms. Poacelli, do you want to wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to you both. Thank you to Grace. That was extraordinary. And I know so many people have been delighted seeing you and having you return to your alma mater. And Lian, we hope you will also come back in a couple of years and do the same. So pass it forward. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Goodbye.